it really relates to how we are going to be heading towards in terms of the future. So if we don't change, then there are going to be catastrophes that are not just to the people in the US, but also people in every different nation, in every nation in the world. It's the destiny of entire humankind.
Welcome back. I'm here with Samuel Chong, who's going to talk about a book called Thiaoouba Prophecy. Samuel, welcome, my friend.
Thanks for having me here, Sean.
Okay, now you're all over the internet in terms of your origin story and things like that, but just tell the audience just a brief introduction about yourself and why you're interested in this book.
So right now I'm a certified court interpreter and a Chinese translator in Los Angeles. When I was young, I was fascinated by space and ETs because I thought if the ETs could come and visit us, they must have advanced technologies and knowledge. And we can just cut the corners and learn from them to progress at a much faster pace. We wouldn't need to go through all the processes of developing all the different hypotheses and theories on different laws of physics. We could just bypass all the steps and to go direct and learn the final gem of physics and things like that. So I was interested in searching for information from ET contactees and to learn what the ETs told us about how we are living our lives and how the things are going right now.
Now, when you're going through this search, how old were you and where were you when you discovered this book?
Well, I was in the US at that time. That was back in 2014. So I was searching on Amazon for ET contactees information and books about that. And I found this book, Abduction to the Ninth Planet. It was called back then. And I didn't really pay much attention because I thought it's just another ET contactees book. By that time, I read so many already. I checked it out from local library because it was selling very expensively on Amazon. But I couldn't put the book down. I couldn't put the book down because it really answered all the questions I had in my mind about the paranormal, the mysteries in the world, ancient civilizations, the pyramid, Bermuda Triangle, stories in the Bible, and also advice that the ETs are giving us how we should live our lives to build a better world.
Now, when you talk about ETs in this book, I believe in prior interviews, you talked about there being 9 types of worlds in the universe. Can you say a little bit more about that?
To be more exact, it should be 9 categories of planets in the universe.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yes. So there are 9 different categories of different planets in the universe. We are living on category 1 planet, the lowest category in the universe. And the Thiaoubans, the ETs that Michel Desmarquet, the author, had contact with, they live on category 9 planet. And higher than category 9, that will be the source, the creator of the universe, the great ether that the Thiaoubans can join and rejoin at any given time. And I think there's nothing to be ashamed of living on category 1 planet because we are just like elementary school students learning the basics. And we can just learn gradually and to progress.
And when you read this book, and you actually went to Vietnam to meet Michel Desmarquet, what was his motivation for writing the book?
Well, he had to write a book because that's the whole purpose of the ETs taking him from Earth, his hometown, Cairns, Australia, to their planet for 9 days and then came back. He was instructed to write a book and to report everything that happened to him, what he saw, what he experienced, and how he felt about everything. This is their order or instruction.
And this happened in, I know the book was, I think, was published in 1989. When did he have this experience?
Well, it happened in 1987, and he finished writing the book in 1989 and got it published in 1993.
Okay. And then you read this book, you felt motivated to visit him in Vietnam, and then you were able to bring it into the Chinese market, and it sold, it had bestseller status, at least in the science fiction category. And that's not we're not saying it's a science fiction book. It's just if you want to sell a book like this in China, you can't sell it any other way. Is that an accurate statement?
That's right, because in China, the media is controlled by the government and there's a strong censorship. Actually, there's no such a category of nonfiction paranormal books. It's just either is science fiction or is narrative or documentary or something like that. If it's written or published as a documentary or a report, it wouldn't have been published by the censorship or maybe by the government. Yeah.
And I believe the version that's sold in America or the United States is a little bit different than the version that's in China because there was something that was removed. What part of the book was removed in China?
In China, there's one part I mentioned about communism. They're saying that communal society does not equivalent to communism because communism is a dictatorship government. This part is removed. And the other part is removed is the reference related to the Tiananmen Square incident back in 1989.
Okay. Yeah. And for folks who, in the American audience who are living under a rock, that was when there were protests in Tiananmen Square. And I can't remember the name of the army unit, but it was from Inner Manchuria that came in to end the protest.
What happened was that there was a tank man who stood in front of a tank and then stopped the military from coming into Beijing city and having the massacre. What happened was that one man stopped temporarily the military from coming into doing everything that they were going to do to the people.
Yeah, that's the iconic tank man. It's just a quick aside. Whatever happened to him? Is he still around?
I don't think he's still alive or around. They finally did everything that they were going to do, despite what happened. And I think that's an unfortunate history in China.
Okay. So going back to the book, there's 9 categories of planets. Why are we here on a category 1 and why are they there on a category 9? In other words, did we screw up somewhere or are we just less evolved, a younger planet? Kind of what's the explanation behind that?
Well, on this planet, we have young souls, we have old souls. People learn different lessons here on Earth, spiritual lessons to be precise, because we have our physical body, we also have our astral body, and the astral body takes away the experiences of all the things that happen in our lifetime to our higher self. So once we evolve spiritually enough, we can progress to the next level. So some of us are young souls, but some of us are older souls, and some of us can remember what happened in our past lives. So this is the gist of the book, is that we are here to learn different lessons in order to progress. And also talk about a lot of other people, like, for example, Michel de Marquet, the author, was living on category 7 planet before, but then he made a mistake and he was sent back here to learn more lessons.
What was his mistake?
Well, it's actually a secret that he told to his friend before he passed away. I think he violated one of the 10 commandments indirectly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So why did they choose to take Michel de Marquet for 9 days?
This is a very good question. I think there are 3 reasons. First, he is a man of action. He took actions immediately whenever he was instructed to do certain things. And his main purpose was to write a book, and he did it. And the second reason is the main reason is that he was what they call suko, a person who has had 80 past lives already. Only a person like him, a suko, could survive for 9 days on their planet and then come back. Other people like me or others, they can only probably survive for maybe 3 or 4 days, not 9 days, probably because of the vibrations or things like that. And the third reason, I think, is another valid reason, is that he was a landscaper in Australia, a farmer. He didn't have any higher education before. He didn't have any preconceived notions or presuppositions of what's going to happen about a UFO. If they were to take a ufologist or physicist to their planet and then come back, there would be a lot of additions or paintings of their own ideologies to the book. This is not what they wanted. They wanted an accurate report of what really happened.
And what's Michel Desmarques's background? You mentioned he was a farmer. Is he Australian? I mean, he has a very French-sounding name.
He was born in France, Normandy, France, but he later moved to Australia. So he's a French Australian.
Okay. All right. Now, you said he was a Suko?
Yes.
What language is that?
That's Thiaoouban, the language spoken on the planet Thiaoouba, the planet where he visited for 9 days.
Okay. So when he was there, very briefly, what did they reveal to him or tell him?
Well, they told him about all the mysteries of the paranormal on Earth, such as what really happens when someone gets sucked into the Bermuda Triangle, which is a portal warp into a parallel universe, and who really built the Great Pyramid of Egypt, for what purposes, and what really happened in the history regarding the ancient civilizations like Atlantis, Lemuria, and the ancient Egyptians, and where we all came from originally. Like the yellows and the blacks originally came from a planet called Bacratini 1.35 million years ago. And then the Caucasians came, and then the ancestors of the Polynesians came. And then the Jewish people, the Hebrews, came the last, about 12,000 years ago. And also the stories in the Bible, like what really happened to the two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, what really happened when Moses led the Hebrews out of Egypt, who parted the Sea of Reeds, not the Red Sea, but the Sea of Reeds, who gave the manna to the Hebrews and Moses to eat, and also the birth of Jesus and Christ. So a lot of things.
So who destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, turned it into a pillar of salt?
The Ethiopians, because the people in the two cities were so evil and incompassionate, and they actually punished the compassionate people, like a girl who helped the poor. And the girl gave him food, but they punished the girl to death. So this is how evil the people in the two cities were at that time. The Ethiopians, the ETs, believe that it's a danger to the people who were in contact with them, because leading a lot of people to a moral decay or downfall. So it's just like a cancer cell or tumor, malignant tumor in your body. You have to take them out by having a surgery. So this is what they did.
Why destroy a human city, though? I mean, I know you talked about a cancer. Like, what's their relationship with the Earth?
They have been guiding people on Earth throughout history. Since the yellows and the blacks first came to Earth, they have been helping us in general, like throughout history, directly or indirectly. When we were not ready, they helped us indirectly. When we were ready, like the people on the continent of Lemuria, they were spiritually evolved enough to have a direct communication or conversation with the Ethiopians. So they have been like our professors or mentors, guiding us to evolve spiritually and to survive more successfully on this planet. So they're kind of our mentors.
And how do they interact with the world? I mean, on the one hand, they'll come and destroy a city, but on the other hand, they seem to be much more subtle. So how do they interact? Is it with a one-on-one basis, like with Michel Desmarques, or is it something that someone must seek? What's their kind of medium or role of interaction with the population?
Well, they take different means to interact with us. Throughout history, they took people to their planet, like Michel Desmarques. Enoch was one of the people they took to their planet. So there's a book of Enoch. And sometimes they intervene directly or indirectly. When they couldn't find a single compassionate person, they would destroy the entire city, like Sodom and Gomorrah. When they find that there are people who needed to be saved, and they try to save us, like helping Moses to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt, because they believe that at that time, the Hebrews were spiritual and following their own religious beliefs. But the Egyptians, the pharaohs, were kind of restricting their religious or spiritual involvement. So this is why they sent Moses to us and to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt. to escape from the evil rules of the pharaohs. So they helped that indirectly or directly, if you think that way. But they also intervened directly about 2,000 years ago by having Jesus and Christ come to us. And this book, this is getting more interesting because according to Thiaoouba Prophecy, this book, Jesus and Christ were actually two different beings. Jesus, the one who was born out of Virgin Mary, was actually born out of an embryo put in by the Thiaoubans, the ETs, into the uterus of Virgin Mary. And indeed, he was born out of a Virgin Mary. But that young Jesus, even though he was highly spiritual, intelligent, having a very good conversation with the teachers of the temple, he couldn't perform miracles. And later he went to India and died in Japan. So there's a tomb of Jesus in Japan, in Shingo village, Japan. But the Christ who preached and performed all the miracles was not the same person as Jesus. Because when a person is born out of an embryo, the person would have to pass through what the Nagas would call the river of oblivion, forgetting all the things that happened in the past lives.
Yeah, the river Styx, according to the Greeks, right?
Yeah. So forgetting all the knowledge to perform miracles. So that young Jesus, born out of Virgin Mary, couldn't perform miracles. So this is why there's no record in the Bible of Jesus performing any miracles. The Christ, on the other hand, was one of the Thiaoubans who actually built a body of Jesus that resembled the appearance of Jesus. And then the astral body of the Thiaoubans went inside of the body made by them. And then that Christ began preaching. So this is why when Christ saw his mother after he began preaching, he didn't call his mother mother, he called his mother woman. So I find that to be consistent.
And this is what the book said. Is there any independent sources that, could show that Jesus died in Shingo, Japan, and any other corroboration that would at least point to it? I know 2,000 years ago is a difficult task to find something, but are there any fact patterns historically that can at least point in that direction?
I mean, there are historical records of Jesus going to India. And right now in Japan, people can visit the tomb of Jesus Christ in Shingo village there. And people have studied about that village and found that they still sing a song that sounded like ancient Hebrew language. And they still have different customs that are so different from the nearby villages, and they don't know where they came from. And the descriptions in the book are so precise and detailed that it says that there's another tomb next to the tomb of Jesus, which is the tomb of his brother. And there's a lock of hair buried in the tomb of the brother of Jesus. So if right now people want to open that tomb, they can verify the information. I think it's not just this details in the book. There are other details in the book that I later was able to verify and validate. So I think it's impossible for Michel Desmarquet to make this up, especially before the days of the internet, especially given the fact that he didn't know how to type a computer and never traveled to Japan and didn't know how to search information elsewhere.
And what sort of things in the book have you, as just examples, have you kind of verified?
Yes. After Michel Desmarquet entered into their spacecraft, they disinfected him using yellow light and blue light. So there's a Harvard Medical School study that says a specific certain wavelengths of blue light have antibacterial, antiviral effects. So that's a research study done just a few years ago. And there's also another study that just came out, I think 3 or 4 years ago, that says certain wavelengths of yellow light also have antibacterial effects. And also the book talks about the US government sending hundreds of millions of needles into space. It specifically mentioned that if people don't believe anything written in the book, they can check that out. And I did look it up. It turned out to be Project Westford in the 1960s. I think the US government collaborated with MIT, sending hundreds of millions of copper needles into space in order to improve the telecommunication signals. They thought that the signals would bounce back from the copper needles. but the ETs believed that that would cause a harm to the people on Earth. So they collected the needles. So the first Project Westport failed, according to official records, because it failed to launch. And the second Project Westport, according to official records, is a success. But who knows, because millions of government spending were spent, and they probably need to save face. According to the ETs, the second launch was also a failure because they also collected the needles. The official records say otherwise.
Yeah, Project Westward was definitely a thing. That's for sure. Anything else? Examples that you can think of that you were able to confirm?
The existence of reincarnation. And I think that's very important because more and more modern researchers confirm that people do live many lives after they pass away. Dr. Michael Newton, Dr. Ian Stevenson, and Dr. Brian Weiss, they all have extensive studies done on reincarnation. And also the fact that parallel universe exists in certain locations on Earth, that's also a validation of this book, because David Paulides, a researcher who wrote the Missing 401 series of books, also documented a lot of people who just suddenly vanished when they hiked the US national parks. One of the theories is that they actually were sucked into a parallel universe. And this book talks about what it is really inside of a parallel universe. And I think there's another validation.
Do people who are sucked into these parallel universes ever come back? And if not, where do they go? Like, what's in this parallel universe?
Well, some of them come back, and most of them stuck there forever unless they know how to get out. I think it's important to know that in a parallel universe, time stops and people don't feel any hunger or thirst or pain. David Paulides has one case that's very interesting, is that when the body of the person who had gone vanished was found, and it seemed that that person walked to his bones. So it seemed that he didn't feel any pain. And so this kind of indirectly corroborates with the fact that inside of a parallel universe, people don't feel any pain. And also today, I just found that Dr. Wilbur Allen, I don't know if you know him or not, he actually had some devices or equipment that monitor different locations in space where UFOs frequently appear or disappear. And there are certain locations in space in which just UFOs or UAPs suddenly appear or disappear. And I think this is also another validation of this book, because this book talks about the ETs using parallel universe as a way to hide themselves. So they come in and go out of parallel universe, appear and disappear, because they don't want to cause a lot of panic on Earth. So they use that as a hiding place. And Dr. Wilbur Allen is able to find where exactly those portals are. People should check him out as well.
What was his name again? Dr. Wilbur
Allen. Yes.
Okay. So it's not necessarily the same as our universe. It's kind of like a temporal pocket or something like that, where time stops. But you said that somebody just walked until they were bones?
So people vanish into the parallel universe, and sometimes they accidentally get out. So when they accidentally get out and their corpses are found, and one of the cases in which David Paulides documented was that it seems that he walked to their bones. The bones came out from walking.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, as if he didn't feel any pain.
Okay, so the person would have been alive on the other side, came back, and had been walking for so long that he was dead.
Yes, he walked so long inside the parallel universe that he didn't feel any pain, and then he suddenly came out of the parallel universe and died. And people don't die in parallel universe because, it's pretty interesting that when time stops, You're just something like a mummy or something that you just live there and you don't know why you live there.
Is there anything there? I mean, is it like if you disappear in a forest and you walk into one of these portals, what does it look like on the other side? At least if the book covers that.
So when Michel Desmarquet was inside of a parallel universe, he saw people wearing medieval clothes and people who behaved like savages. So people accidentally got sucked into the parallel universe and they're stuck there. So they just wander around and wearing whatever they were wearing before. And they didn't know why they were there. And frequently they don't have a lot of knowledge. It's not a good place to be in, actually.
By savages, usually mean people who were primitive humans, basically.
Yes, primitive human beings. And I suspect, it's just my personal conjecture, I suspect that the Bigfoot that people saw or people see are from parallel universe because they know how to navigate inside and outside of parallel universe. So this is why sometimes they appear and disappear.
And then when humans are there, are they just so confused that he just can't, or are there like civilizations and communities on the other side?
The parallel universe that Shadow Marquet was led into didn't have any civilizations. It's just people just wander and walked around, and actually the savages tried to attack them as well. It was a very dangerous situation, and the ET named Tao had to kill some of the savages in order to protect Michel Desmarquet, and is for self-defense reasons. So it's a very strange field or universe or sphere. I would say that if people hike in national parks in the US, when they suddenly see the things change, the environment change, they should go back to where they came from immediately. Just walk backwards and to go back to where they came from. So not to be stuck there. Because they are like spheres moving around in space. They may elevate to higher altitudes, and that wouldn't be a good thing when you want to try to get out.
And the portals, are they just wormholes, like the Lorenzian wormholes that open up, or is it something we don't understand yet?
Well, they're just kind of like a wormholes or like portals or warps. It's just a natural phenomenon. And I think with Dr. Wilbur Allen's research, we can actually pinpoint the exact locations of the portals into a parallel universe. But remember, they frequently change their locations because they float around in space. So they constantly change their locations. It's dynamic.
But it's same region, though, because you said he was able to predict where these UFO sightings were happening frequently.
Yes, within a certain region. But to pinpoint their locations exactly, it requires a specific time because they frequently change their locations over time. And I think the Bermuda Triangle is actually one of the most well-known locations on Earth. And the reason I know that they change in their locations because there was a case in the 1800s in which a boy, he was getting water from a well in his backyard, and it was snowing. And he walked outside of his house to his backyard and disappeared and vanished. And his family members were looking for him by following his footsteps, but his footsteps stopped in the middle of nowhere. But they could hear his sound, his voice from far away, kind of like lingering voices and changing different locations. But the voice became like the volume became smaller and smaller until they couldn't hear anything anymore. So this is why I think that I'm pretty sure that the locations of the parallel universe kind of swings around. So I think it's a good validation.
So why did the Thiaoubans take Michel Desmarquet to a parallel universe? Just to show them what they're like, or?
They used the parallel universe as a hiding place to prevent Michel Desmarquet's neighbors and people in Australia from seeing them. So once inside a parallel universe, their spacecraft wouldn't be able to be seen by people on Earth. So it's a hiding place.
And why hide?
Because they didn't want to cause panic on Earth. or to the people on Earth.
Okay. Now, abductees, contactees sometimes or most often report grays and things like that. That's an entirely different thing, correct?
Yes, it's an entirely different race of ETs. The Thiaoubans are Nordic-looking, 9 or 10 foot tall hermaphrodite, meaning that they have both male and female sexual organs. They're highly compassionate and loving people. When Michel de Marquet was with them, he didn't really want to come back to Earth because Thiaoouba was just like a paradise to him. Everything was so wonderful and so perfect. And those people are highly advanced and highly evolved. They know everything. They never age because they have the knowledge to regenerate their body's tissues and cells and organs. And they can actually perform all the miracles as performed by Christ, like levitation, having telepathy, communications, and materializing and manifesting objects, and also making an adult human being within 24 hours. This is the thing that they can do. They showed Michel de Marquet some of their abilities and supernatural psychic powers. The Greys are a different kind of ETs, and they actually told Michel de Marquet about the Greys as well. In 1995, Michel de Marquet received a telepathic message telling him that he could reveal the information about the Greys. The Greys who came here did put implants to people on Earth, 150 or so people by the year 1995, in order to monitor our activities and how we respond to the increasingly decreased immune system. Because the Greys are a dying race, they have been losing their immune system since ancient times. They wanted to see how we respond to the same situation. They're learning from us because we have been losing our immune system since 1948. But the Thiaoubans say that there is no harm to the implants to us because they have been monitoring the activities of the Greys. I kind of think that the personal opinion is that if the crashed ET or UFOs are from the Greys, if they are from the Greys, then we are actually learning from our peers. The Greys also come from a category 1 planet. So if we really want to learn, we should learn from the masters. We should learn from the inhabitants of a category 9 planet, learn from the Thiaoubans who have been guiding us throughout history, throughout ancient past.
Have you had any experiences with the Thiaoubans at all?
Not at all, because I want to learn the best I can here on Earth without their assistance, because that would be the best way to learn. Like a lot of people ask why the ETs don't just show us and help us to resolve all the issues on Earth. That would counter that, just like parents teaching their children mathematical problems. If they're really smart and wise, they would tell their children the basic principles so that their children can find the ways to solve the problems on their own. So similarly, the ETs, at least the Thiaoubans, they never served the meal on the plate. They wanted us to go through this struggling process to learn on our own how to survive and how to evolve more spiritually on Earth so that we can remember better.
In your opinion, why do you think the book did so well in China? What aspects of it made it spread?
You know, it's kind of like
I mean, just not to interrupt, but if you know the answer to this, how many, just to give a U.S. audience a sense of the scope of this, how many copies has it sold so far in China?
So far in China, it's sold close to 500,000 copies just for print book. That doesn't include digital copies and people who download the book free of charge, because people still can download a free copy of the book on the internet. So even that's the case, without any copyright protection, physical copies close to 500,000 copies. That's in China. In Taiwan, close to 50,000 copies. And I think the reason is that the social media kind of caught this story. And because of the government control and censorship, people were so eager to look for kind of like spiritual and science fictional books. And this book fills the vacuum of the demand of the people in China. And with the social media attention, and I think people wanted to learn more about it.
So just to give folks a sense of the scale of that, if you write a book in the United States and you sell 10,000 copies in the first week, which is very rare, you are likely, and I say are likely for a very specific reason, to be a New York Times bestseller. Now, if that book is about something that the New York Times doesn't agree with, you can sell 500,000 books and you won't be a New York Times bestseller. But just to give a sense of the scale, if it's a book that's kind of right down the middle in the United States, 10,000 copies would, in a week, it's 10,000 copies in 1 week would make you a New York Times bestseller. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. I want to just give people context, because you're going to have a lot of cynical people being like, China has over 1 billion people, 500,000 is not a huge number. But two things: people don't buy as many books as you think they buy. That's number one. And number two, that's demonstrated by, you sell 10,000 books in your first week. That's all it takes to be a New York Times bestseller. Okay. There's something that you didn't mention on this podcast, but in some of the materials that you sent over, there's a reference to the Philadelphia experiment. Can you say a little bit about that and how it's tied to the Thiaoouba Prophecy?
Yes. This book specifically mentions that the US government was trying to develop a time machine. And that actually is trying to help the US government to successfully develop a time machine by saying that when a planet starts or gets formed, there's a psychosphere, what the author would call a psychosphere, what some spiritual people would call the Akashic record, that kind of like a cocoon that rotates at 7 times the speed of light, recording and documenting everything that happens on the planet. So if you can match the vibrations of that cocoon, then you can access the Akashic record or the time machine, what happened in the past. So they're saying that the US government was trying to focus more on the wavelength, not the vibrational frequencies. So they're saying that if you really want to successfully come up with a time machine, you should instead match the vibrational frequencies of the cocoon so that you can get information out. So this led me to think about the Philadelphia experiment that happened a few decades ago, in which they were trying to cloak the ship from radars by projecting certain wavelengths of energy onto the ship so that the ship wouldn't be able to be detected by the radars. But then something strange happened. There was a kind of time or space dislocation. And I think after that, the people have been trying to develop something from what happened to the Philadelphia experiment. And I think they haven't, at least by the year when the book was published, they were not successful yet. I don't know what's happening right now, because some people like Peter Moon says that the government has developed something already. I don't know.
Can you say more about, you have to focus on vibrational frequency rather than
The wavelength.
Because aren't they inversely related?
I mean, this is something about the book. I mean, Michel Desmarquet is a farmer and landscaper. He didn't have a lot of scientific background. So when certain scientific knowledge was told to him, either he said, "Oh, don't say that to me because I'm not a scientist," and then the conversation would stop. Or
okay, so he put it into his own words, and in doing so, there was a little bit of imprecise language that can get you kind of tied up in this, because again, I think they're inversely related. Okay, so vibrational frequency just means something else. It doesn't necessarily mean the wavelength's frequency.
Right. And another example is that when Michel Desmarquet saw sparkling lights on their monitor when they were traveling, he asked them what they are, and they told him that is the antimatter guns that they were using to destroy the space dust and small asteroids. And then they were trying to explain to him how and why they did that. And Michel Desmarquet stopped them, saying that, "Oh, don't get into the scientific details and things like that." It's kind of very unfortunate. But one thing is that I noticed that in one of the lectures that Michel Desmarquet gave, one of the reasons why they didn't take a scientist or physicist to their planet was that, according to Michel de Marquet, according to him, if they took like a scientist or physicist to their planet, then the Thiaoubans, the ETs, would be very afraid of us turning the knowledge into weapons and destroy ourselves. So this is why they specifically chose someone who didn't have scientific background to their planet and report everything he saw.
Okay. Yeah. Did you know there's antimatter in your banana? Did you know that? Very, 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 very small things, but yeah, we did a whole other episode on that with a NASA scientist. So what is their goal on Earth? It seems like, from what you've said earlier, it's to educate the human race to be teachers. So if someone is open to more understanding, how do they interface with either, the universe, God, Thiaoubans, other ETs? Because I think you mentioned something about, it's kind of like the Martin Luther effect, right? Which is, without the intercession of the priesthood. And I think we're in a moment in time that people are coming to the same realization about governments, right? Just going direct, because the government's not going to, they're going to fight tooth and nail to reveal any of this knowledge. So how do people get around that?
So the book actually gives a solution that's through the power of the people, because the power of the people is not to be underestimated. It actually gives a very good example of what happened on different planets, in which it only took about 4 people to change dictatorship government into a more democratic, more spiritual government form. And what happened was that the 4 people preached about spirituality and love, and they protested in front of the palace of the government, and the soldiers shot them to death. And in the first place, nothing happened, but a few months later, the people of the country began to realize what happened, and they collectively formed a concerted action and had a strike, and everything stopped. The police joined the force, the military joined the force, and everyone stopped working. And so the government, being a dictatorship government, had to cave into the demands of the people. So it actually only took a few months for the government to change, and the people rose up to the power. Similarly, it's trying to give us knowledge that we can do the same thing here on Earth, just like what Martin Luther King preached and what Gandhi did in India. Through nonviolent resistance, we can rise up against tyranny and to change the world to have a better future. And actually, the key is to know that we are the creations of God. And when God created every one of us, it inserted a tiny portion of itself to each of our astral bodies. So we are part of God, and God is part of us. So when we really want to connect to God, we don't really need to go through an intermediary agency like the organized religious organizations. And we can actually just pray and meditate to really follow what the intuition tells us to do, or our gut feelings, or just have a good night of sleep. Because in dreams and in meditation, in prayers, sometimes the answers will be given to us if it is good for our spiritual development. So it's important to realize this. We don't have to pay money to wash our sins away, and we don't need to donate to the religious organizations in order to get together and to follow the teachings of Christ. We can just do that directly. The key is to follow the teachings of Christ, and not to follow a specific religious organization or a specific religion.
Now, before this call, we were talking a little bit about Chris Bledsoe and the experiences that he's been having with these light entities and things like that. And folks would have seen that on the latest Beyond Skinwalker Ranch in the United States, which aired 2 days ago. So those entities, which he doesn't know, but I think he believes are angelic or light beings of some sort, where does that tie into this Thiaouban prophecy or worldview?
I think there are different ETs that have come to visit us, but most ETs have been observers. They don't intervene or interfere with what we have here, whether good or bad. And actually, except for the Thiaoubans, not a lot of ETs intervene with our activities here on Earth. They may just guide us indirectly by projecting certain images to us and to give us guidance how to live our lives more spiritually. I think it ties into how we should be more spiritual, using technologies to help our spiritual development so that we don't destroy Earth. And actually, the Thiaoubans I list, they tell us the 4 most dangerous things on Earth, the true dangers on Earth. Number 1 being money, number 2 being politicians, number 3 journalists and drugs, number 4 religions. So everything is tied to money. So if you look at the big pharma, big energy companies, and even the media, they all revolve around money. So I think a lot of ETs have been telling us we should focus more on spiritual evolvement or development, not to be so delved into the accumulation of wealth. And actually, it's true, because if you look at the stories from people who have near-death experiences, not a single one regretted of not investing in certain stock that went up in value. They all regretted of not having a good relationship with their friends or family or relatives. And they all wanted to live a better life by giving more love to their friends and family members.
Well, you can't take it with you, right?
Right.
I'm not going to even ask you about why politicians would be put in that. I mean, it's self-explanatory. And personally, I don't need to understand why journalists would be put into that category. But why? What was the explanation for folks who still believe what these people write? Why would this philosophy put journalists in that bucket? Because one could make the counter argument that they make sure that information gets out, whether or not it's biased or unbiased. At least it's out there.
Because right now, the journalists all want to pursue sensationalism. They want to report stories that catch the eyes and make money for the media companies. So it actually damages our psyche because bad news sells. If they only report the bad news, it's going to influence a lot of people's actions. For example, if one murder was reported sensationalist by the journalists, then a lot of people would imitate the actions of the murderer, and that would cause more detrimental effect to the society in general. Instead, journalists would report accurately and briefly about the negative events that happen in our society, and also focus more of their attention to reporting the good things that people do in our lives, the compassionate people, the people who help others, so that people, when they read the stories, they would want to imitate and help each other. So it's going to improve our society in general, to make our society more like a society with solidarity and with more love together. Yeah.
Now, religion is probably the controversial one you mentioned. So I can see positive aspects of religion, and I can also see negative aspects of religion. And on the positive side, there's the sense that some religions serve as knowledge keepers, right? Like the Vatican would be an example of that. There's also the sense that they provide a basic moral code, absent belief. I think you mentioned the 10 Commandments earlier at some point. On the other hand, I can see how they can be a force for evil, right? In terms of presenting things in a manner that disables critical thinking, where everything is about belief and less about knowledge or personal knowledge. So why would religion be in that category? Because I'm sure that there's audience members who are going to be very offended by that, and I understand it. Again, I'm on the fence on this one. So what's the rationale behind religion being one of these great evils?
First, let me clarify. We should follow the teachings of Christ, that's for sure. When Christ came about 2,000 years ago, he was meant to abolish religions. He wasn't meant to establish a religion of Christianity. And within 300 years or so after his preachings, people followed his teachings. But then when everything kind of turned into the canonized Bible. And there are certain things that the religious organizations try to do that kind of distorted the original ancient scriptures of the Bible. And this book, Thiaoouba Prophecy, specifically named the 4 Catholic Church Council meetings that distorted the ancient scriptures of the Bible.
Was it like the Council of Trent, the Council of Nicaea? I'm sure there's 2 more, but I can't.
Yes. And it's so specific that it pointed out the inconsistencies of the Bible. So it gives like 2 pages of descriptions of what the Bible says and what the inconsistencies are, just from the scriptures in the Bible. So people who are interested might take a look at that. And I found that to be interesting because in the Catholic religion, they believe that God has no face. But in the Bible, in the Old Testament, there are certain descriptions that talked about people or human beings that came to earth. So religions are organized by people, and people try to use religions to their advantage to kind of keep others ignorant about it. When you talk about the Vatican records, this is a very good example. The Vatican has a lot of information that hasn't been revealed to the public. I work with a lawyer called Danny Sheehan, who okay. So he was the former counsel for the Disclosure Project. He was also the general counsel
for the Jesuits, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
When he was looking into this UFO matter, he was requesting access from the Vatican to grant him access to the Vatican records, the library. He was denied access twice. So it's like denying your own lawyer of doing certain things for your benefit. So you can imagine what kind of records they have to keep it from the public's knowledge.
Yeah, I think they opened access to Dana Walsh Pasolka, who wrote a book called American Cosmic. But I think they look for people who are highly credentialed religious scholars, so a PhD in those sorts of things. And Danny Sheehan is got the standard JD, lawyer kind of degree. So, I don't know. People who are studying ancient religions and stuff like that will have at least some knowledge or training on how to, be archivists and, treat the materials in a way that doesn't cause them to dissolve in your hands and things like that. But I don't know. Maybe there's a good reason, but they definitely keep things. And I think there's like 53 miles or 54 miles of warrens underneath the Vatican where they store all this stuff, apparently.
Well, speaking of the Vatican records, I want to bring you one more attention, is that I don't know if you believe in astrology, but I know a kind of well-known astrologer in Los Angeles who actually received a mysterious phone call requesting him to draw a birth chart of a certain person who was born in Bethlehem. And the date that he was given was
it was like March or April or something, right?
March 28th, the year 28 AD at 5:40 a.m. And then when he drew that birth chart, it really surprised him because it appears to be someone who is very extraordinary, both highly spiritual and highly practical. It just seemed like a perfect birth chart. And it really corroborates with the book, Thiaoouba Prophecy, because the birth of Jesus can be really pinpointed really from the Chinese astronomical records. But the coming of Christ, who came later, before he began preaching, is actually, according to Thiaoouba Prophecy, was actually an ET coming from the planet Thiaoouba. And this birth chart, the date and time and location, actually pinpointed probably the Christ that came and that resembled a perfect human being. And actually, Michel Marquet, the author of the book, explains something about astrology, saying that it works because it's actually a natural phenomenon in which when a person is born on a certain date and time, a certain percent of the electrons of the astral body is actually affected by the electromagnetic forces, influenced by the positions of the planets in our solar system. So this is why certain people who are born at the same time, they have certain similarities in terms of personalities. And I think kind of, if you really think about this book explains almost everything that we can think of, like everything imaginable. And it's really worth looking into it. Yeah.
And in terms of who was the astrologer that you were?
The name of the astrologer is, let me give you the name, is kind of Paulo. Let me see, Gianpaolo Di Coco.
Okay. And then he's based in Los Angeles?
He's based in Los Angeles. And he received this mysterious phone call, and the voice sounded like a robotic voice, like machine-made voice. And they
when
had
did he receive this phone call?
Years ago. I don't remember which year, but years ago. And then when he asked him where he got the date and time and the information, he said, the other side of the phone call said the Vatican records.
Interesting. Okay. And then it seems like you're all in on this book. So is this something, there's the difference again I mentioned earlier, the difference between belief and knowledge. Knowledge comes from direct experience. So DeMarque would have knowledge of the Thiaoubans if what he claims is true, if he was taken by them, he directly experienced it. But by reading a book, you're not getting direct experiential knowledge. You're just getting kind of a belief system, because you seem like you know as opposed to believe. So what flipped that switch from belief to knowledge for you?
You know, after I read the book, I felt, oh, this is something extraordinary that answers all the questions that I was wondering about. Mysteries of the pyramids, and it's one of the most interesting things I was looking for. But then in the postscript, it says there are more incredible things that the author Michel de Marquet was not allowed to write about because we were far from understanding them. That got me extremely curious. There's a whole reason that I decided to track him down. And I visited him twice, and he told that information to me, which shocked me. And it really relates to how we are going to be heading towards in terms of the future. So if we don't change, then there are going to be catastrophes that are not just to the people in the US, but also people in every different nation, in every nation in the world. Is the destiny of entire humankind. So this is why I've been spending a lot of time and energy to spread the information and the messages in the book, hoping that people can wake up and to really look at what's really happening around them, and to know that they can connect to God on their own through their prayers or meditation, and so that they can form concerted actions, collective actions, having maybe like a strike or something, using nonviolent resistance, so that we can change the future for the better. Because the past is fixed, we can travel to the past. We can look at what's happening in the past. But the future...
Is the past really fixed, though?
It is.
Are you familiar with retrocausation?
You know, Michel de Marquet was led into what happened in the past 14,500 years ago. When they took his astral body to the psychosphere, the Akashic record, he saw a holographic projection of all the things that were happening in the past. He could observe and feel and hear and to experience what happened in the past, but he couldn't change anything in the past. He couldn't touch them because they were like holographic images or projections. So that's
it was like a recording of the past as opposed
to recording, 3D recording, 4D recording of the past. But the future is determinable. It depends on our actions. We can change the future. It's really analogical to what we see where the ants are going. We can see the stones or rivers or a pond of water in front of the ants. And the ants can also change the directions where they're going to get around of the obstacles. Similarly, we can also change the directions of how we live our lives so that we can avoid the catastrophes in the future. It's like some psychics can see certain things happening in the future, but if we change our actions, we can get around it.
Any last words of advice to the audience?
Well, I think it's important to have knowledge. It's important to have the knowledge to know how to respond to the situations in the future. There may be some financial challenges ahead of you or relationship-related issues. The key is to look inside for answers, because the most important sentence in the Bible, I think, is the kingdom of God is within you. So you should always look inside for answers, not outside. And check this book out, because this book contains a lot of useful and practical knowledge that you can take advantage of.
Is it okay if I put the link to the book in the description?
Yes, please.
Okay. And I didn't bite when you first said that he told you something that he hadn't told anybody else. And I know everybody asks the question, what is that knowledge that he passed on? I kind of know what the answer is going to be, but my audience doesn't. So I kind of knew what you had said in the past. So I assumed everybody else did, but I'm just going to, I have to do my audience that favor.
Yeah. So Michel Desmarquet told that one thing to me, but he also told me that Tao, the ET, told him and to ask me not to tell anyone else. So I have to keep my word. But what they didn't say is that I couldn't write an article revealing as many clues and hints as possible to make it a puzzle. So I wrote an article titled The Second Coming of Christ. So people, if are interested, can check out the article. And certain passages in the 4 Gospels of the New Testament of the Bible are accurate. And I kind of related to some of the verses in the Bible, and is very interesting.
Okay, I think we both know what book, or at least I know what book you're talking about, even though you didn't tell me. And I'm sure the audience will be able to figure it out from context clues. So I appreciate you, Samuel, and thank you for coming on the show. And I hope people learn a ton about the topic, and we'll see how it goes.
Thank you, Sean.
Yep, thank you again. If you enjoyed this video, please click on like, subscribe, and the notification button so that you're alerted anytime I post something new.